10,000. That's it. Stack that tiny mountain of XRP and you might never have to set an alarm clock again. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, hang tight, because by the end of this story, you'll know exactly why that number keeps echoing in my head like a winning lottery jingle. Okay, picture this. It's a muggy Monday morning, the kind where the coffee seems tired before I even pour it. Now I'm scrolling through another sea of red candlesticks, Bitcoin wobbling, Ethereum kind of limping along, the entire market kind of bleeding value faster than you can say bear cycle. Now my phone pings again, and there's 𝗕𝗪𝗪𝗪 on X with his trademark fire emoji pep talk. Hammering one idea. 10,000 XRP could set you free. Now, I've seen hopium before, but sometimes, or at least something maybe I should say about this claim kind of feels different. It's precise. It's a round, almost annoyingly doable target. So I pour more coffee, extra shot, just because, well, self-inflicted math is coming. And I decide to pull on this thread until I either unravel a kind of gold sweater or find just another cheap yarn. First, raw numbers, right? XRP's been dragged over gravel for the last 3 months straight, down 29.34% in February alone. The nastiest month drop is kind of stomached in more than 3 years, right? Now, year to date is still kind of limping, minus 1.47% or so, but here's the twist, right? Everything kind of looks worse, right? Bitcoin's off almost 10%. Ethereum, a stomach-churning 52.6%. Zoom out of the entire crypto circus and we're kind of missing $561 billion worth of elephants from the 10. Now that's a 17.59% chunk of its market cap. Whew. And yet, XRP kind of hangs in there like the stubborn cat clinging to the curtain. And resilience kind of breeds rumors, right? Now, Farina kind of keeps repeating that if you just hold 10,000 XRP today, about 20 kind of grand at the moment, give or take a few cents here or there, it could be kind of the boarding pass to a permanent vacation. For perspective, of course, if you've kind of grabbed that kind of same stash 6 months ago when XRP was at 50 cents, it would have cost you, a measly 5 grand. Same number of coins, radically different price tag, right? Now, timing is the difference between a discount rack and a kind of deluxe boutique. Now, skeptics will raise an eyebrow so high that it doubles as a new forehead. And let's be honest, I get it, right? Because to turn 20 grand into $1 million, we're talking about 4,801% kind of moonshot. Now, XRP at the kind of mythical kind of $100 mark. Now, that's the kind of financial equivalent of kind of launching a kind of paper aeroplane and expecting it to dock at the International Space Station. But here's where it kind of gets juicy. Now, Farina isn't the only voice whispering triple-digit dreams. You've got analyst Dan Arando, who kind of slaps the same $100 ticker or sticker, on XRP earlier in the year, arguing that its kind of utility in cross-border settlements is kind of the rocket fuel that nobody's factoring in. Now, meanwhile, of course, number crunchers at kind of Sentiment poured cold data on the fire and discovered that only 4.68% of wallets, roughly 299,547 legends, that is, among 6.4 million, actually hold those kind of coveted 10,000 tokens or more. That means 95% of the audience is actually sitting in the cheap seats while a tiny kind of, choir rehearse for a potential hallelujah moment. I needed a bit of a reality check, so I did what any kind of rational kind of degen does here, right? I opened an anonymous poll in our free crypto Discord. There's a link in the description down below, by the way, if you want to kind of join the madhouse. And I asked the following: how many people actually believe 10,000 XRP hits financial freedom? And the responses were kind of split like an avocado, half bright green optimism and the other half, stone hard doubt, if you will. Now, some kind of people kind of talk about building generational wealth. Others kind of said that they'd be thrilled if XRP just pays for next year's Netflix subscription, right? A kind of decent pizza, but we don't talk about pizza in crypto. Now, that kind of divide, it tells us, at least it tells me, we're staring at a classic psychological tug of war then. Fear of missing out versus fear of looking foolish. But let's go ahead and break down why the 10,000, number has some teeth, right? It's small enough for an everyday investor to kind of grasp, right? Skip over the new car, grab the coins instead. But, big enough to actually benefit from supply shock if XRP's demand does indeed explode. Now remember, there's only 100 billion XRP that will ever exist. And Ripple locks up a pretty decent chunk of that in escrow, of which they actually repay out of the 1 billion that gets distributed every month, about 80% of it back on average, back into that escrow, which means actually the monthly burn rate is actually only 20% of that 1 billion. You can do the math. Now, every time a kind of bank settles with XRP instead of ancient wire transfers, a tiny spark lights under the demand. Now, multiply sparks, you kind of get a bonfire here. Multiply bonfires and you kind of get Arizona in July. Yet here lies the problem that kind of gnaws at my logical brain, right? Belief alone won't kind of print money, right? Critics, like 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗔𝗥𝗘 argue that $100 XRP in this cycle is straight up fantasy, a bedtime story told by maximalists kind of sipping the hodl flavored kind of Kool-Aid. Now, wealth mentor Linda Jones kind of pours her herbal tea calm over all the hype as well, saying maybe someday, but just not this year, kind of sweetheart kind of thing. Now, market cycles, they don't just care, which tokens logos kind of decorate your Twitter handle here, right? When liquidity dries up, even diamonds look like rocks. And so I dug deeper, right, for signs of kind of traction in the kind of real world. Ripple on again, off again dance with regulators finally kind of looks less like a lawsuit and more like kind of mediation. Asia Pacific corridors are kind of testing RippleNet for remittances that kind of used to kind of crawl like a snail with postage stamps. Now, if those corridors flip the switch and full volume, or at least switch it to full volume, liquidity pools kind of balloon up, right? Spreads tighten, and suddenly using XRP isn't just faster, it's also cheaper. Now, whenever money can move quickly and cheaply, CFOs perk up like dogs hearing a kind of treat bag. That's not hopium. That's just simple corporate behavior. Still, we can't ignore market psychology, right? Back in the last bull run, social media was non-stop with kind of lines of rocket emojis, right? The noise kind of lured retail money in and prices shot up, not because of daily transaction volumes, but because nobody wanted to be the last one to the party. Now this time, retail is bruised, cautious, maybe borderline suspicious of anything shiny. Now, ironically, that's often when smart money accumulates quietly. Now, Sentiment's chart kind of proves this, right? Nearly 12,000 new wallets reached the 10,000, XRP threshold this year alone. Now, somebody's filling their bags whilst the rest of Twitter kind of doom scrolls. So let me kind of reel this back to personal terms then, right? Imagine you're stacking 10,000 XRP like Legos. At today's $2.20 something, each, you're kind of laying down 20 odd grand, pretty serious. But 20 grand in 2025 might be your annual rent, or it might be the kind of, portion of your kind of paycheck that you usually kind of evaporates on takeouts and micro transactions that you don't even remember approving. Now, if XRP only kind of grinds to $10, less than 500% upside, well, you're sitting on a 100 grand bag. It's not yacht money, but it's definitely work optional money if you're kind of frugal, that is. And if by some twist of fate, the triple digits kind of prophecy does land, that's a cool $1 million. Now we're kind of talking debt wiped, 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗧𝗧 may be early retirement if you're very disciplined, or at least a very comfy buffer against the next recession. But there's a catch. Freedom isn't a number, it's a mindset, right? I've met investors who've turned 5 figures into 7 and still felt chained because their lifestyle grew faster than their portfolios. 10,000 XRP at a $100 price tag each could change your zip code. But if you kind of keep inflating your wants, freedom kind of skitters away, kind of like a squirrel with your last French fry. Now, Farina's message here is, whether he kind of spells it out or not, is really about patience and resistance and restraint. Accumulate, chill, resist the urge to flip for a quick double, because the bigger payoff down the road is when everyone is kind of finally tuning in. And here is where the story reaches its cliff edge, right? We stand at a weird junction where macro fear, a kind of skittish economy, regulatory smackdowns, and perpetual crypto is dead headlines kind of smoothers price action. Yet fundamentals kind of grind towards at least forwards in the background. Banks test, corridors expand, and the list of wallets over 10,000 XRP keeps stretching. It's kind of like watching a plot that refuses to kind of boil, while knowing that the stove is definitely on. So, do I think XRP will hit a $100 kind of price tag next week? Well, I'd sooner expect my cat to start paying me rent, right? But I can imagine a future where regulatory clarity, global liquidity demands, and plain old network effects push XRP's price to 3 digits over the next decade. Now, I've seen stranger things. Remember when people laughed at $100 Bitcoin and scoffed at $1 trillion Apple? History loves to embarrass certainty. So I'll tell you what I decided after that second espresso kicked in. I set up an auto buy for XRP. Every time the price dips under $2, nothing kind of heroic, just a kind of steady dip, then if the kind of dream plays out, fantastic. That's freedom kind of chips. If it fizzles, well, I'm not wrecked, right? I've merely kind of sacrificed a few kind of streaming subscriptions and fancy coffees. It's the same kind of strategy that I preach in our Discord. Again, hop in through the link that is in the description down below if you're kind of craving a no-hype, data-driven community. We share charts, laugh at our kind of bad trades, and celebrate the tiny wins because the journey, let's face it, it's long. At the end of the day, all investing boils down to a single question. What vision of the future are you betting on? Now, Farina's 10,000 XRP target is just a lens to focus that question. For some, the answer is conservative, index funds, and early bedtimes. For others, it's kind of past the moon juice and let's see how high we can fly. Neither camp is wrong. They just kind of speak very different I guess, derelicts of risk. And here's the take-home moment then, right? If 10,000 XRP feels like an impossible mountain, shrink it, right? Start with a single coin and add on. If 20 grand is peanuts to you, maybe the real challenge is sticking to your conviction when the market kind of slaps you with minus 30% candles. In both cases, discipline, not dreams, is what actually kind of mints freedom here. So yeah, maybe one day we'll kind of clink glasses on a beach, reminiscent about the good old days when 10,000 XRP cost less than a mid-sized car, and everyone thought the idea was absolutely nuts. Or maybe we'll meet in the metaverse, avatars laughing at you only live one risk tolerance, even if XRP only crawls towards $10. Either way, the story that you write with your portfolio will be uniquely yours, and no chart analyst can script it for you. That's why I'm sharing this saga, not to clown a, guaranteed millionaire's kind of blueprint, but to remind you that opportunities often look ridiculous right before they become obvious. Whether XRP is your golden ticket or just another chapter in your crypto adventure, right? The decision to stack or stand idle is, solely resting with you. Just remember that freedom isn't only a price target, it's the freedom of choice, the freedom to learn, and the freedom to pivot without apology.